This is Andrew Wolf, and in this video I'm going to give a very brief introduction and overview of cardiac anatomy. And you see here a little cutaway sagittal view of the heart, and I'm sure that all of you remember that the heart has four chambers. It has two atrium, the right atrium and the left atrium, and then it has the right ventricle and the left ventricle. And again, a little bit of review. The right atrium receives blood from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, and is deoxygenated blood coming from the systemic circulation. And this passes through the right atrium in the right ventricle. And then you can't see the cutaway here, but with the way I did the cutaway here, but this would be pumped into the pulmonary artery into the lungs where it is oxygenated. That will return through the pulmonary vein as oxygenated blood into the left atrium, which will go through into the left ventricle and then out into the systemic circulation. So, you know, the major function of the heart is to work as a pump. And it is to pump blood around the body, maintaining homeostasis of the internal environment, or the intracellular fluid around the cells. So it has the function of carrying deoxygenated blood away from the cells and oxygenated blood back to the cells, but it also mixes all sorts of other nutrients. So carrying new nutrients to the cells, like nutrients rich in glucose and fatty cells from the GI tract and the liver. And it also carries wastes away from the cells. And then it also has the function of delivering endocrine agents like hormones to and from the cells from the various glands in the body. Okay, so that's the basic overview of the function of the heart. Now let's talk a little bit more about the various components of the heart. So the heart is made up of three different tissues. It's made up of the outermost tissue is called the pericardium. The inner layer here, the muscular layer, is called the myocardium, and then inside, lining all the chambers of the heart, is called the endocardium. Now I'm going to start by talking about the pericardium, and we'll work our way inwards. So again, the pericardium is made up of two layers. The layer that is innermost to the heart is called the visceral pericardium, and this is adhered to the myocardium. So it is close to the myocardium, and then there is a thin potential space in between, and then on the outside there is the parietal pericardium. Now I'll get to that potential space in a minute. So the parietal pericardium, I'll just pick a slightly different color here, we'll use orange, is on this outside layer. And what's interesting about the parietal pericardium is it actually has sort of two layers to it. And obviously the layers are all sort of fused together. And so the innermost layer is made up of mesothelial cells. And these mesothelial cells secrete fluid into the pericardial space. And the entire pericardial space may have about a teaspoon of fluid, so it's just one sort of single, very thin layer of fluid. That's why it's called a potential space, because the visceral and parietal pericardium are sort of connected together by this thin fluid layer. And this fluid is mostly water, and it's actually very, very close in chemistry to intracellular fluids from around the body. So very similar to plasma, very similar to intracellular fluid. It has a little bit of protein and some electrolytes. And this fluid is made by these mesothelial cells, which are epithelial cells that make up the innermost layer of the parietal pericardium. Now, on the outside of this parietal pericardium, there is a very thick, there is a very strong fibrous layer, and it is very thick in some spots, particularly down here. There are very many strands of the pericardium here, and actually it adheres to the diaphragm. So we have these thick strands that are very high in collagen and very strong fibrous tissue that anchors the parietal pericardium to the diaphragm. And it also anchors the parietal pericardium to the great vessels on the superior surface of the heart. Okay. And there's thinner layers of this sort of collagen, as these collagen fibers on the outside of the parietal pericardium all the way around the heart. But the very thick strands are where the heart is anchored to the diaphragm and to the great vessels. I'm just going to make a little cutaway view of the pericardium here. So we have this fibrous component of the parietal pericardium. And then we have, now remember, this is all one layer, so this is very closely fused together. This is the mesothelial cell layer of the parietal pericardium. Then we have this very thin layer of fluid in between, and then on the inside, fused to the heart, is the visceral pericardium. And the visceral pericardium is going to contain the coronary arteries and coronary veins that supply the heart with its own blood supply. And then here on the inside, fused to this visceral pericardium is the myocardium. Okay? So those are the basic layers. And then obviously on the inside of this myocardium, we have the endocardium, which is a single layer of endothelial cells. So these endothelial cells sort of make up this inner layer here. And then a thin basement membrane. I made this a little thicker than it should be. Really, the endocardium is a very, very thin layer. So one single layer of epithelial cells, squamous epithelial cells, with a basement membrane. Now, functionally, the heart is anchored to the diaphragm and to the great vessels, so it does not move within the thorax. It stays in place within the thorax. However, it's because of these layers of pericardium with the fluid in between, these layers are able to slide against each other, even though they're sort of fused together. So this is just very similar to the same situation that we have with the pleural space. The pericardial space allows the heart to sort of move within this space while still being anchored. So the pericardial space provides sort of a joint within the body where one part can be moving where the other part can be still, and there can be some sliding action between these layers. Okay, the myocardium. So the myocardium is made up of specially adapted muscle cells. And they're different than skeletal muscle cells in a number of ways. So the first way, as you can see here, this is sort of a collection of some myocardial cells. And, muscle cells are going to, they're sort of laid in these long sort of branches, and each cell is very, very long and encompasses the entire length of the muscle. Myocardial cells are much shorter, and they're actually connected together end to end, very different than skeletal muscles. And skeletal muscles are actually multinucleated, but we won't get into that too much. So the cells are very short and are very much interconnected, and they also are branching. So one of the modifications of myocardial cells is the fact that they are branching. Whereas skeletal muscles are laid parallel to each other, myocardial cells are interwoven together, sort of like in a basket weaving formation, and this adds strength in a circumferential direction. So circumferential strength. And if you picture the nature of the heart, you'll understand intuitively why the heart needs circumferential strength. And also because of this interconnectedness, it allows the efficient passage of action potentials throughout the tissue. Now, so that's another difference of the myocardium, is that it can conduct action potentials. And it does this between cells because each of these cells is connected to another with a series of little protein pores. So in between each cell there is a series of tiny little pores, and here I'll give you a little cross section here. So the action potential can pass from one cell to the next because there is this interconnection here. Hold on a minute. So ions can freely flow between these cells as if they are all one. Okay, so let me show you an end-on view of what these. So if you looked at a cell, from the end, there are these 6 protein pores that connect the two cells together, and these protein pores make up what's called the intercalated disc, and that is just the end-on disc that connects one cell to the next. So now I've heard this pronounced both intercalated and intercalated. Pronounce it how you like. This is called the intercalated disc, and again it's just made up of these 6 proteins that allow ions to pass from one cell to the next where the cells are connected within the myocardium. Now the cardiac tissue is not the only tissue in the body that has intercalated discs. The other place would be neurons that have an electrical synapse. So it's the exact same mechanism and the exact same formation with the 6 open protein pores that allow passage of cytoplasm, ions, water, protein from one cell to the next. So essentially the entire myocardium shares one big giant cytoplasm, and for this reason it is called a syncytium. That means that just basically means that it is a large group of cells that share the same cytoplasm. So an action potential that is moving down from this direction from the left to the right here on this picture is going to cross through this intercalated disc as if it's not even there, and cross through the next one, and cross through the next one, and cross through the next one, because this entire structure acts as if it has one single cytoplasm. So the action potential passes along as if it's just one big cell. Now, another aspect of myocardium that is different from other tissues in the body is that it is packed with mitochondria. There's more mitochondria in cardiac tissue than any other tissue in the body. Mitochondria. And this provides the myocardial cells with lots of energy. So the volume of these cells is made up of 25% myocardium. So 25% of the cell volume is filled up just with myocardium. And if you don't remember the functions of myocardium, you can go back to the early slides in this course, to the early videos where I talk about the use of the creation of ATP with various energy substrates. And basically, the ATP is used for actin and myosin binding to cause the myocardial cells to contract. Because of this large number of myocardium, of mitochondria within the myocardium, the cardiac tissue is excellent at extracting lots of oxygen from the blood. So, most tissues only use about 10 to 20% of the available oxygen within the blood, but the cardiac tissue can actually use about 75% of oxygen. So blood that is returning from the cardiac tissue via the coronary veins oftentimes has an oxygen saturation of around 20 to 25%, and a partial pressure of oxygen that is very, very low, 30 or 40. Now there are some myocardial cells that have no actin and myosin in them, and they tend to look very pale when you look at them, and they have the same exact branching structure and the same sort of intercalated discs, but they don't have any ability to contract. So they're non-contractile, and these are going to be the tissues that make up the SA node and the AV node and the Purkinje fibers of the heart. So these cannot contract, but they can conduct action potentials. And again, they are muscle cells, but they are muscle cells that don't have actin and myosin. So they're muscle cells, they're myocardial muscle cells that cannot contract. Okay, so the endocardium. The endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart, and it is made up of squamous epithelial cells and a very thin basement membrane. So I'm kind of giving you the view as if you're looking down at the endocardium, one of the chambers of the heart. And they fit together very tightly. They do have some interstices, and actually some of the myocardium receives nutrients through these interstices, just like they would from capillaries. But really only sort of the first two layers of cells of the myocardium can receive nutrients this way. So some of the blood is able to provide nutrients for the first few layers of cells. The rest of the myocardium, which is going to be 99.9% of the layers of the myocardium, are going to have to receive nutrients from the coronary artery circulation. Now, endocardial cells are very similar to, in fact, nearly indistinguishable from endothelial cells throughout the body. So endothelial cells are the cells that line vessels, including arteries, veins, and capillaries. And really, it is just a contiguous layer from the arteries and veins through the heart and back to the other side. And it's, they have the same functions, and I'm going to talk more about the functions of endothelial cells when later in this module when we talk about arteries, veins, and capillaries. Okay, so that is the three layers of the heart. Again, it is the pericardium, the myocardium, and endocardium. And that is it for this video.